Our next session, ladies and gentlemen, is Driving Change, the Future of Mobility in a Rapidly Urbanizing World. And our moderator for this session, please put your hands together as I would like to invite Michelle Hennessy on stage, who is our graphic detail editor from The Economist. A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, as I would request Michelle to please join us on stage. We are about to begin our next session. If I could please request all of you to take your seats and settle down. Thank you.
Hello, welcome all. I hope you can all hear me okay. My name's Michelle Hennessy. I'm the editor of The Economist graphic detail section, and I want to invite you all to this panel discussion on the future of mobility in a rapidly urbanizing world. By 2050, 2/3 of the world's population are expected to live in cities, placing immense pressure on urban infrastructure and mobility systems. This panel will explore these challenges and opportunities in reshaping urban mobility. We'll be asking our panelists how cities can ensure that mobility is not only sustainable, but also accessible and equitable, and how policymakers and businesses can work together to develop transit systems that align with environmental goals without deepening social and economic divides. This discussion will also examine how India can balance economic growth, infrastructure development, and clean mobility solutions to become a global leader in sustainable urban transport. Joining me on this discussion today, we have Rob Boyd, Head of APAC Sustainability Policy Partnerships at Boeing, Aravind Mani, the Chief Executive of River Mobility, Santosh Iyer, the Chief Executive of Mercedes-Benz India, and Karthik Ganesan, Fellow and Director of Strategic Partnerships at the Council on Energy and Environment and Water. Unfortunately, Mahesh Babu will not be able to join us today because of a medical emergency, but for now, please join me in a round of applause for our panelists. Hello, thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope you can still hear me okay with the microphones. But why don't we start by addressing the challenges in urban mobility? Karthik, why don't I start with you? Yes, please all make sure you have your microphones. But let's start just by discussing what the challenges are that we're talking about with urban mobility.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd start by asking the audience here, what is the reason why many of you are here in Bangalore? Is it because it's nice to move around in Bangalore? Clearly not, right? It's because the weather is good. The weather is good. That's the only reason pretty much why anybody wants to live in Bangalore. But we seem to be sort of forgetting that we're here for the great outdoors that Bangalore actually presents us. And our ability to sort of interact with the city is because of the ambient condition that it presents. But we're sort of trying to drown that out by forcing a mobility model that is alien to India and is probably not the best for a setup like Bangalore. As we were discussing, the Economist featured 15-minute cities in the most recent edition, and there wasn't a single Indian city in the top 50. I think Mumbai was the one that scored the highest among, and I think that was also in the 30 to 40-minute range was where the accessibility was. So the primary challenge in India is most people are actually looking to get around using the cheapest form of mobility. And for most people, that is unfortunately a two-wheeler because it kind of breaks even with the fares that you typically have in buses. And the bus service is just not there. So effectively, we've seen a motorized mobility system, private mobility system, where 75% of the vehicles on the road are two-wheelers on account of the lack of four-wheelers. And that has then driven this development of the city as well. And I would argue that we have to sort of go back and explore what exactly is the reason why we live in urban areas, what is the services that we want of urban areas, and how do we interact with the spaces in urban areas. Unless we sort of do that, we will always be chasing something that the West has, but in reality the West already has moved away. And the example that comes to mind is Norway, which today is the leader when it comes to electric vehicle penetration in many ways, four-wheelers even. But the the expectation in Norway is that by the course of 2035, they are hoping to make large parts of their city even, motorized vehicle free, which basically means that they're moving further away from just restricting ICE vehicles. It's actually even just restricting EVs. Whereas here we are trying to play catch up. So when will we realize that in geographies like in Bangalore, which are amenable for cycling, walking, and active mobility outside, we don't want to destroy it by, trying and forcing motorized mobility forms. Of course, there's a role for motorized mobility, and I think that's what we'll be discussing. So the primary problem is we need to address the mobility needs for the masses and not sort of the high mobility, the ones who want to get from point A to point B the fastest, because that's not necessarily serving the needs of everyone. So maybe I'll leave it with that opening remark, Michelle, and then we can come back later. Yeah.
What are some of the opportunities for clean energy, especially in transport? Perhaps we can start with the EV sector. Santosh.
No, I think firstly, we need to realize there is no option for decarbonization, especially for a country like India. And the good part is the policymakers also understand this very clearly, along with all the OEMs now. When we launched the first EVs in India, the question was why EV or why one should be the case. Now, at least I was in Delhi for the motor show. I could see so many products from across OEMs. The question is which EV? So I think in the last 24 months, the overall narrative is changing to decarbonize transport. Of course, I can also resonate a bit with what Karthik mentioned, that is mobility the only solution? But India is at the cusp of transformation of growth, and economic growth comes with people movement. It can be via two-wheelers, cars, even planes. And I think that's also we need to balance that, because at one side we have extreme poverty. On the other side, we have wealth being created, and this equitable creation of wealth and growth can only happen when there are, I would say, the right solutions for mobility. From a luxury OEM perspective, we say clearly that there is no luxury without sustainability. We need to look at options. At this stage, we don't see any other option apart from EVs. In the future, there are many other concepts, be it hydrogen, be it others, when it comes to technology. But again, for India, I think there has to be a huge focus on integrating public transport, decarbonized public transport into the mobility solution. It can be in the form of metros, it can be form of buses, EVs, and many others that we need to come up. But we still feel, and that we also have an R&D setup in Bangalore here, that we need to use the power of digitalization in India to find innovative solutions for mobility as well. And maybe we delve deeper as we move more into the discussions.
And Rob, in India and beyond, what does cleaner solutions look like in the aviation sector?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. Aviation's got some unique challenges. It is a difficult sector to decarbonise. Electric is only an option for the very smallest of aircraft. That is coming. It's almost here today. It's some very exciting, technology developments. We will see over the next decades, with some regularity, at least prototypes or several, becoming commercial. What they will impact is very short mobility. So there will be some application within big cities, helping people get around more efficiently from an airport to somewhere, but over a short distance. The biggest challenge aviation has, though, is actually decarbonising, so getting to net zero. The airlines, including all the Indian airlines, have committed to net zero by 2050, so that's different to the government objective, but that's a commitment that's been made by the Indian airlines, and that's going to require substantial amounts of sustainable aviation fuel. So basically replacing the fossil fuel that's used today with large amounts of sustainable aviation fuel. India is well positioned here. I mean, there's probably the most comprehensive report is from the World Economic Forum, which shows excess feedstock in excess of eight or nine times what's required in India. But that feedstock today is not harnessed. It's not organised. It's not collected. But that's a big economic opportunity which awaits, and that will happen.
What are the biggest barriers to scaling up green energy solutions in emerging economies? This is a question for any of you.
No, challenges of scaling up starts from the consumer to start with, because I think today consumers are not ready to pay a premium for sustainable solutions. So at least it starts from there. And then it's up to us as one of the players in the ecosystem to find solutions which can match. And of course, the stakeholders like government to see what can they do in the initial phase of decarbonization to rapidly transform. Because it's very clear, we have done many studies that the moment you price a sustainable solution, even 1% more than, for example, a combustion engine, the take rate changes significantly. So the challenges are how do we build this up? Secondly, for some of the solutions like electric vehicles, there's a lot of dependence on infra, public infra. And it's again a bit easier to create the infra but to operate them. Today, if you now buy an EV, you don't know whether the charging spot is available when you reach there in a country like India, because we are still developing some of these solutions. Again, you need 3 to 4 apps on a phone to charge a car. There is no integrated ecosystem for charging. So these are infrastructure related challenges. But the bigger one, of course, is, as I said, the cultural shift to understand that this is a direct impact on public health, also congestion in cities. Can we have much more awareness? The good news I would only say is schools in India are playing a major role. Education system in India is playing a major role in educating. So my kids, for example, are much more aware about using transport responsibly, using decarbonized forms also responsibly. But it takes time. So at this stage, till the time the inflection point doesn't come, I think the challenge would be to set up the infrastructure, create consumer awareness, and more so try to find products, cars, bikes, or any of the categories, even public transport, at a cheaper solution or at the same price point what is today available, because consumers are not willing to pay that premium yet as such.
So at least in the two-wheeler space, we see the consumer behavior or the motivation for a consumer to buy an electric two-wheeler is very different. Like for example, the per capita GDP income in India is under $300 a month. And compared to the US where it is around $5,000 to $6,000 a month. But if you take the cost of petrol in India, it is the same as that in the US. It is just over $1 per liter. So $6,000 per capita, $1 per liter of petrol. $300, $1 per liter of petrol. So what the eventual impact of this on the monthly expenditure is significant. So India sold just over 1.2 million electric two-wheelers last year, 2024. And people are buying it primarily because of the cheaper cost of operation. Because the cost of operating an electric two-wheeler is 1/10 the cost of operating a petrol scooter. So if a petrol scooter costs someone $30, $40 to drive for 1,000 kilometers, electric is just 1/10 of it. So the motivation of consumers is very, very different. That is what is actually progressing the sales of electric two-wheelers in the country. I'm sure it's not the story with luxury cars, but this is the story in two-wheelers. So the consumer behavior and the sheer economics is what is driving sustainable mobility in the two-wheeler space, not the need for cleaner mobility.
What about the motivation from the private sector? So for companies like Mercedes, how do you balance new sustainability goals with profitability and business models?
No, as I said, for us, it's very clear. There is no luxury without sustainability. Also, as a brand, we are generally targeted as well, much faster. So I think we have to be responsible to what we do. Globally, we have a clear goal of Ambition 2039 where we have said that we will decarbonize our entire operation. So it's not limited to tailpipe emissions. I think that's just one part of the story, but right from well to wheel, we are fully committed to be carbon neutral, and that's where we are doing. In fact, most of the new retail outlets, even in Bangalore or in India, they all run on solar powered outlets. Our entire factory in Pune is running on renewable source energy, and this has been there for the last 4 years. So I think it's not an option. Our shareholders demand it for the future of this company. But on the other side, the products we sell, it's about the consumers as well. We need to get this out that there is one set of purists who love cars, who love combustion engine cars, who love the fun of driving those combustion engine cars. And then there is another segment which is, I would say, fully converted to the electrification and to the goals there, but for a different reason. In the two-wheeler segment, as he mentioned, it's more driven by TCO. In the luxury segment, it's more about what car I use to drop my kid to school. In the mass passenger car segment, it is still a combination of TCO as well as, of course, you want the green number plate to drive the car. So I think the triggers are different. For us, we need to work with the ecosystem. We just need not look at our own core segment. For example, we are working in Bangalore with the Bangalore Metro Transport Corporation, with the Bangalore Metro, to come up with an app solution which can actually help last mile mobility. It is a seamless mobility solution we can give in also, so that consumers shift from owning private cars to also mobility. There is enough space for everyone. If you look at the penetration of passenger cars in India, it's 24 cars per 1,000 compared to 580 of Germany, for example, or even China is much higher. So I don't think we need to be nervous about the growth potential. We need to be, as responsible OEMs, look at what can we do to ensure that India grows sustainably. On the other side, I think there is enough headroom for us to do our business, grow profitably. It's no secret that, the margins, because you asked this question on profit, the margins are much higher on a combustion engine for all of us compared to EV. But that cannot be an excuse to sell combustion engines. So we were the first to introduce an EV in India in our space. We were the first to localize an EV in India, to produce it locally here. And we are also active in trying to, I would say, educate customers. The other end of the spectrum that we are trying to contribute is talent. There is an absolute dearth of talent when it comes to our workshops, to the EV, to the technicians. So we have a tie-up with many engineering colleges across India also to develop talent, know-how on some of these technologies. And this talent is available for the industry and also for, in general, for other industries who are now decarbonizing and who are setting up. So a lot of focus on the talent development, also in terms of growing the ecosystem in general.
How does profitability change with different sectors? Rob, how does it look in the aviation sector?
Well, firstly, sustainability is integral to the future of aviation. Being a global sector, an aircraft that leaves Bangalore today can be on the other side of the world in 12 or 14 hours, where the regulatory environment might be quite different to what exists here today, but it is heading in a direction of requiring more. So that's the starting point. One thing to sort of bear in mind with aviation, if anyone took a flight to come here or has taken a flight recently, that flight you've just taken produced half the CO2 emissions of the same one, roughly speaking, 30 years ago. So no other sectors had CO2 improvement or efficiency improvement at that same rate, around 2.5% a year, and that's a product of thousands and thousands of engineers, a lot of which actually work here. I was just touring our facility yesterday in Bangalore. We've got 6,000 people, probably the best facility I've seen of Boeing in any part of the world, right here out near the airport. That will be a net zero facility by 2030 as well, on track, just at that level. So, long and short, it's built into the long-term plans of the company. There's, being sustainable in the products, but also sustainable financially, are totally connected.
Please.
You talked about profitability. Obviously, I'm not from the private sector, so can't speak to the bottom lines of the private companies here. But the reality is that private mobility in India, notwithstanding the taxes on fuels, has a significant amount of subsidy by way of the infrastructure that's actually created that ultimately serves private mobility, right? There have been studies that have been done that have looked at the budgets of city corporations, the amount of money that they spend on roadworks and building new, highways and roads and everything else, and then look at what is the traffic mix that they carry. And if you apportion the cost of the money, the amount of money that they actually spend to the kilometers, passenger kilometers that each of these different modes support, you realize that a disproportionate amount of the money actually goes towards private cars. Right? In fact, the numbers, depending on this city you are in, are staggering to the point where there is virtually no subsidy on offer for a bus user. While we constantly keep saying, oh, bus tickets are priced so low, the reality is the money that's actually been sunk into creating the road infrastructure, which is actually plying you, is the biggest subsidy that the government is giving you. So it's not an explicit subsidy in terms of a cash handout or a reduced tariff, but it's really the cost of being able to ply your road there. And I think that is something that we all miss, which is that, many of you here, I'm presuming, are residents of Bangalore. There is a new proposal in the comprehensive mobility plan, which is to build a road from Silkboard to Hebbal at a cost of about $2.5 billion. Now, is that the best option for Bangalore to mitigate its traffic woes? Or is it by substantiating the fleet of buses that it currently runs and accelerate BMRCL's, phase 2, phase 3 works? Clearly it's the latter, but the reality is because there is pressure. Now, the automobile industry, unfortunately, is also looking out for how do you basically grow. Every industry is. And the automobile industry's constant claim is we're responsible for close to half of India's industrial GDP in some way or the other. That's the statistic, and the numbers in terms of employment, direct and indirect, are somewhere in the range of 30 million. So when they put these staggering statistics, they're already sort of pushing back against any narrative that says you try and claw back on private mobility, you're going to face this massive backlash of jobs that are associated with that sector, and the economy that it basically spurs is not going to exist anymore. So it's some sort of like a bogeyman. And the reality is, while they acknowledge, right, that pollution is indeed an outcome, I don't think it's sufficient for the corporates alone to acknowledge it. The people on the ground need to be made more aware of what is the impact of the choices that they make, and then be given options that actually reduce them. And that is where it can't be left purely to market forces. Because public transit will never come in with market forces only acting. It has to be actively a public-led initiative, because the investments can only come from there. And to expect an entity to basically compete to provide public transit services at the same level at which the private vehicle operators, who are basically using the services the city provides through subsidized road infrastructure and everything else, are able to just sell their products and just have people move from the get-go, is not the same thing. And which is why most models that tell you what the future will look like are already predicating that India's per capita vehicle ownership or per 1,000 person vehicle ownership is likely to go up to the 150, 160 range, which is catastrophic from our country's perspective.
Santosh, do you want to jump
No,
in?
I think it's a very valid point. But on the other side, if you see from the government's perspective, they've already given the highest rate of taxes to cars. If you see, and not luxury cars. For a moment, let me talk about any car more than 4 meters is taxed at 40%. 48% in a city like Bangalore, the city, I would say, and most states in India taxed at 20% road tax. So 68% of the money, when you pay $100 for a car, 68% goes to the government. It's only 33% which comes to the OEMs. So that also says the contribution, because there are very few sectors where revenue can be generated from the government. It's only real estate and automotive to a large extent, and of course fuel and alcohol. So many of them, if you start categorizing them as sin goods, then the government has very less leeway to do revenue generation. On the other side, if this revenue that is generated from sales of, I would say, cars, and are they allocated only for the same purpose? The answer is no. It's definitely used for many other avenues. So there is no right and wrong answer here. I think there has to be, of course, active town planning to start with, urban planning, decongestion of cities. Public transport has to be the bedrock of anything. Also, for automotive industry to grow, I think there is enough pathway. There are active discussions of phasing out old cars, which are still polluting because they are all in the earlier emission norms. And you just ensure that after 15 years, the life cycle of the car gets over. That will give enough headroom for automotive industries to grow. So there can be different solutions. I don't think the automotive industry is looking at congestion as a, as a bogeyman to say, no, we are okay with the congestion. Because I think that is disrupting growth. To be honest, I have many customers saying, why should I buy a luxury car when there is there's so much of traffic on the road, on the other side. So in that sense, I think we need to collectively find solutions to decongest cities, actively promote public transport, no doubt, and there is enough headroom. The 28 car per 1,000 people actually is a very telling statistics. There is enough headroom for development, there is enough headroom for growth, but it cannot be at the cost of each other. And that's something that we need to see. We are still a growing, developing country. There is an ambition of Viksit Bharat, you can say 2047. That can't come just by ignoring mobility. I think mobility is a fulcrum for economic development, and that can't be ignored at all.
Aravind, let's hear your thoughts on
Just
that.
to add on to that, I think the core problem of mobility in the country is that infrastructure development is reactive and not proactive. Like for instance, India has more than 70 cities with 1 million population. Each of these cities are larger than some of the European countries that you can see, right? 1 million people live in these cities. Only 23 of them have an active functioning metro rail system. Like, it's not that we could have, the infrastructure development should happen faster. And more importantly, it is happening only within pockets. Like for example, Bangalore, we do everything to decongest Bangalore. We rarely do anything to connect the 20 small towns around Bangalore by a fast rail. We don't have a fast rail going to the airport. This is what is traditionally decongested cities globally. You create strong infrastructures, road networks, rail networks, which are going in and out of the mega cities that are growing, rather than focusing on reactively fixing the mobility needs within the city. This will automatically bring in infrastructure, democratize growth around the mega cities, and improve the infrastructure. This will improve growth all around. This is the single important step, if you take, will decongest mobility or solve for mobility solutions globally.
I want to move on to talk about implementing new, more sustainable solutions. And Rob, from your perspective, working in partnerships, what are some policies or solutions that require cross-collaboration from different agencies?
So the experience with aviation is without collaborating, it's very difficult. So you can have an airline or an OEM or just a single party that's interested in it. Odds are nothing will happen. So for aviation, you need four key sectors to come together. So you need the aerospace sector, number one. You need the government, being the policymakers. So without policy, and this is where I do believe that there is a role for the state to get involved, either supportive policies, which I refer to those that support the supply side of clean energy, or also the demand side as well, so actually creating a market for that clean energy. So there is a role on both sides. So you need the government involved. You need the energy sector, and this can be a sector that sometimes just gets overlooked a bit, but basically we've all sort of said it here, but we've become very good at producing energy in real terms very cheaply. We've got more than 100 years of experience and expertise in refining without ever having a price really on the externality that energy, that combusting that energy creates. But the energy sector must be at the table because they are, in a sense, a key to making renewable fuels more cost competitive. Their skills have to be deployed into the current solutions. And the final one's the finance community. Again, they have to be in the room. The estimates for aviation are we need between 1.5 and 3 trillion over the next 25 years globally to decarbonise aviation. So it can sound like a daunting number when I say between 1 and 3 trillion, or it can also sound like a big opportunity. You know, so there's a lot of parts of the world thinking, right, I want some of that money to be coming into my country, adding to my GDP. So that's the opportunity. But you need all four of those to come together. Then you essentially have the ingredients for solving the problems and creating a solution.
And is the real driving force here for change coming from the public sector or the private sector? Karthik?
I think unfortunately no one. Because everyone's catering to their respective interest groups. I mean, we already heard what Santosh was saying about the government's reliance, for instance, on taxes, right? 20% of central government's revenues today come from taxes on petroleum fuels. And a significant portion of many states' revenues also comes from that. Which means that at the core, they're also not comfortable moving away from a regime where they're not getting as much of their revenues today, or the growth in that revenue is not happening at the pace at which GDP is growing. And that is and that's one of the reasons why it's also not under the ambit of GST, which is a big challenge. So, which means that it actually imposes significant costs on businesses because you're actually not able to pass through the costs that you incur through, as part of the, the cascading taxes that you have in GST. So now, on private sector, I mean, as I said, the onus on solving for the mobility challenges cannot be the private sector. Private sector is there to innovate and provide technological solutions in the most cost-effective way. And I think it will find a way to do it. I mean, the Mercedeses have done that phenomenally well. And, startups like River Mobility are obviously doing that by creating products that are, ground up in India. What government needs to do is to ensure that the rules of the game are clear. The regulations with regard to emissions norms, for instance, right, has to be enforced strictly. Right? If recent studies that have talked about how BS6 norms, despite the fact that they are being set where they are, actually aren't being met on the ground on account of a variety of conditions, is problematic. Because then we are all going ahead with the assumption that BS6 is solving for our problems, whereas in reality it may not be. How do we ensure that minimum parking norms that are typically, established in Western contexts are not being superimposed in Indian cities? Cities like Amsterdam today are actively removing parking spaces from their city centers. Now, given a choice, how many of us would not switch our places of residence from the Indian cities that we live in to Western cities just for the quality of life that you experience there? Whether it's the air, right? Whether it's, overall outcomes, right? I understand we have a lot of other benefits that we have here being in India. But the reality is every one of it comes because the externality that we're imposing is being faced by a different group. So mobility is one such. So all the costs that we bear by way of externality from mobility and from the externalities from a range of things, congestion, all of that is being passed through as cost to this economy. And that's one of the reasons why doing business in Bangalore today, as we were discussing, in the lead up to this conversation, is ridiculously expensive, right? So I think we need to ensure that we are looking to address the quality of life angle in urban areas, because that's exactly what top cities in the world today are doing. And unfortunately, no city in India, notwithstanding the high levels of incomes that are there in pockets and in gated societies, is able to offer the same quality of living. And the reality is that most people here aspire probably for their child to be studying overseas somewhere and then finding a vocation afterwards there. It's a tragedy, right? That there is a drain of the wealth that this country is creating, right? But we're not able to sort of sustain that wealth creation here because we don't see that things are changing fast enough here. I mean, that's a very bleak picture, I understand. But I'm sure, our industry friends, given that they have a better pulse of how consumers are responding, can speak to this a little better. Yeah.
No, I would only say that, we have to be pragmatic. It's a country of 1.4 billion population. As an Indian, when I go abroad, mostly to Stuttgart, the first thing when I land in the airport outside, or if I come back, is the number of people, the sheer number of people. So you can keep, discussing about policymakers and what should have been done differently. But it's that we are a nation with 1.4 billion people in a democratic setup where everybody has a voice. And I think that's beautiful. That's incredible also that we can be proud of that as a country. On the other hand, it has its baggages. If you see that, what do policymakers do? They want to develop a area or a region which is not developed to start with. They start offering incentives. Let's take an example. In Bangalore, we are in Whitefield. I remember many years back, this was considered outskirts of Bangalore, not even inside of a Bangalore. I come from Pune. Our factory is in Chakan, which is actually not in Pune. It was outskirts. Now, over the last 15 years, that region has grown. So, Chakan has become an industrial hub, a lot of industries, a lot of jobs for the locals. Same, you can say, for Whitefield. But then the infrastructure couldn't cope up to connect the dots, which is connect a Bangalore to a Whitefield. He mentioned about some tunnel, or a Chakan to a Pune, similarly. So this is, now, was it not planned? The answer is it was always planned. There were highways planned, there were things were there. But did we have the economic wherewithal to invest and make it happen? The answer is no, because the priorities are different in a country like India for policymakers. That's what we feel from a distance. And here I'm saying not as just representative of Mercedes-Benz, but as an Indian working in the automotive sector for 25 years. You see the compulsions of policymakers are real. To balance this economic development and then trying to say what needs to come first. Because if you compromise, say, mobility or anything else, the economic development will also slow down. On the other hand, public health is important. We have been seeing Delhi, the air quality is very different. So I think right now, if I look at public policy, a very clear focus on electrification because they want to decarbonize. They completely understand that taxes are coming from oil, but they want to reduce the dependence because our biggest import bill for India is also oil. So a lot of focus on green energy. If you look at the infrastructure, at the future landscape. So all the ingredients are there for growth and development. Execution, democracy is a reflection of us as well, right? One is you can look into the political class, but also to us as citizens, all of us, some of us in this room at least, or many of us in this room at least. So we have to be patient. I think we have the setup. If I look at the industry growth, or there is a lot of young population trying to buy cars, bikes, a lot of aspiration. And the biggest story for me is the positive aspirations will drive this country forward as well. You know, this growth, be it about Karnataka or be it about India, will come up with these younger demographics and of course implementation of the vision that's there. Maybe that accelerated pace will change. Another statistics. We have sold 2 lakh cars in India, 2 lakh Mercedes-Benz in the last 30 years. The first 50,000 cars came in last 20 years, the first 20 years. We sold 150,000 cars in 10 years, and out of which 1 lakh car came in the last 4 years. So you can just see the rapid pace that consumers are shifting. Now the question is, should it not be decarbonized? The answer is yes. And I think we as brands and also government, for example, road taxes are also waived off in many of the states in India for decarbonized transport, be it two-wheelers, be it, but it's not consistent. The problem is one state does it, another state doesn't do it. So these are challenges. We need to answer to your question, what should the policy, being a federal structure, some of the topics like decarbonization should have an India agenda and not a state-wise agenda. That would be our biggest ask.
What can we learn from other cities? And obviously it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. What works for Amsterdam is not going to work for Bangalore. But what can we learn from other cities when tailoring these solutions? Aravind, what have you learned from working in different parts of the world?
I think India is very unique. I don't think a solution that works elsewhere can be replicated in India. Like, for example, how do we use tuk-tuk for last mile mobility in India, right? Or how do we use two-wheelers in the country? Because we sell 20 million two-wheelers in the country. India practically moves on two wheels. It's because of the lack of public transportation in many places, and also because of the sheer fact that two-wheelers are the most easiest mode of commuting within the country, within cities. Now, I don't think, to answer your question directly, I don't think there are certain models which has worked elsewhere which will work in India. I'll give you an example. Like enterprise rent-a-car is a model which is working in many countries all around the world. where you land in an airport, you take a rent-a-car, you drive all around, you drop the rental car back and come in. There are private companies that have attempted to do this in India and have failed miserably because the consumer behavior towards a rented asset is very different from a consumer behavior to a owned asset. If you own the car, you take care of it. If it's someone else's car, you don't take care of it. And all the more worse if you don't have to return the car to a person and you return the car to an app. Yeah, I don't take care of it. And the shared mobility has failed miserably in India, whereas it's worked very well in other parts. So the answer is, I don't see a model which has worked elsewhere that could work in India.
I mean, if I may, right? I mean, I think Santosh nailed it, right? When he says the democracy we are in is a reflection of who we are as a people. So, who we are as a people is we are in a hurry to grow and to reach those aspirations that sort of avoided us for 70 years now, right? Independence and after, right? Which means that if we see this as a race to sort of get to where the West is, then we'll make all the mistakes that they've made along the way. I think it's important for us to take stock at every step of the way to see whether that is the model for the high density cities that we have. And I think in different pockets of the country, different solutions have worked. We discussed for instance, the water taxi in Cochin, for instance. It is something that is locally endowed with, which moves a significant share of the population and has the potential to expand significantly. And it's a model that has worked in cities like Bangkok, in the Philippines, in Manila, and Cochin has adopted it. And for instance, Bangalore, I mean, going back to what we talked about, the amiable weather here, can certainly sort of carve out a niche for itself if it were to start an active program of getting people actively mobile. We realize with every passing day that the research suggests that Indians genetically are more predisposed to a lot of the lifestyle disorders on account of how our body processes sugar, which means that we necessarily have to be more active than the Westerner in order to not have the same outcomes that might come with the same level of eating. So which means that having a lifestyle that is more walking, more cycling is actually needed for us. And a place like Bangalore, given its endowments, is well suited to start that. So Bangalore's niche is already that. A Mysore can roll that off much more easily because the infrastructure is not yet there, which crowds out walking or non-motorized transit. So I think that's the way I would think of each of these places looking at it. But unfortunately, the policymaker is going to give what we're all asking for, and that unfortunately is not informed by what we need in the long run. And I think.
But on the examples, one is of course on decarbonization, but also safety. For example, India is the epicenter of road accidents in the world. We have 160,000 deaths in India with road accidents. Almost by the time we would have finished this session, we would have had almost 12 people losing lives. It's a telling statistics when you look at the number of deaths on the road. For us, safety has been our DNA as Mercedes-Benz. So we actually did a unique collaboration in Boston. We are trying to do the same in India. All our cars today have so many sensors, and these are all connected cars. And with the customer consent, we are using aggregated data to check. For example, in the Mumbai Samruddhi Mahamarg, which is one of the densest accident spot in India, an expressway which is being built up, we said that to reduce road fatalities, let's use the data coming out of the car. We have 85,000 connected cars. Where is the maximum braking happening? Where is, I would say, the suspension setups changing maximum because of the road conditions, etc. And all this data, if you are then able to give it back to I would say, to the guys who are planning these roads, also from a road safety perspective, where do we build the signals or certain barriers, speed barriers, to reduce road accidents? So I think mobility as a sector can also contribute actively for improving safety. We can just not look at the congestion aspect of it, but we can also take care of the safety aspect by using technology, IoT, AI, and with so many sensors, not only for us, now many cars comes loaded, and if you are able to aggregate this data, use it back for the society to ensure that we as responsible OEMs are able to also reduce road fatalities and accidents. So another example of using technology for sustainable mobility solutions.
Karthik, I want to come back to a point that you made about water taxis, also walkability. How do cities that are growing and growing quickly create a sort of a network of not just EVs, not just aviation, but how do you sort of approach all of these different forms of transport at once?
I mean, it starts with what a city like, for instance, Bangalore is already doing by putting out this comprehensive mobility plan. The thing is, it needs to be a little bit more participative where the people of the city, and that goes back to the democracy point that Santosh brought up, which is the people of the city need to participate in the future that is being laid out for it. With large infrastructure projects, once you create them, you've basically set in place the demand for that infrastructure for the future. So if you create a new massive roadway, you are ensuring that people will come and flood it with cars because you've created that. So before you make large investments, it has to be a consultative process where the residents of the city, and unfortunately, because many of our cities today do not retain their historical character, the people living here are effectively economic migrants, which means that their relationship with the city is not the same as the relationship that somebody who was an original resident here had, right? The majoritarian views really couldn't care too much about what this means for the long term of the city. There are a few places in the country where that exists, right? To me, Pune, for instance, represents that. Parts of Bangalore actually has those groups which are sort of fighting to keep, a semblance of what that city had. But the reality is, most cities in India, because of the way they've grown, we've not created new urban centers. What we've created is economic centers which have drawn people from the heartlands to the urban areas. And once the center got occupied, we've basically now had new urbanization happening 20, 50 kilometers away now, and people commuting these really far distances on cars. So it's not the kind of urbanization that you would find in the United States or anywhere else where smaller centers are also economic heavyweights. It's the usual suspects that are also the economic heavyweights. So I think for us to really create economic opportunity which is dispersed, and I think that goes back to a point that we were discussing, which is how do you make some of these tier 2 cities more desirable to live in? I mean, and if we can't choose to live there, we can't be preaching to the audience. So I'm not suggesting that, hey, I'm doing it, so please do it. Clearly, I'm not. Right? I'm in Delhi, unfortunately, as I keep saying always. But that's a choice that we make. So how do you then demonstrate that there is a certain quality of life that can be experienced through better, lived experience in urban areas? And how do you then get people to also start valuing it is something that I think needs to happen in a consultative process by also putting in place costs that then start telling people that it doesn't make sense anymore for me to be living here. And unfortunately, I think we're not yet there because, as I said, the idea is that we try and squeeze out as much juice as we can from the large growing centers, and then we'll find out. So hopefully it will not be a disruptive change, but it will sooner or later happen where people start valuing the quality of life that they have in urban areas, and we will find maybe newer shoots occurring in other areas. That's my theory of how it might work, Michelle. Yeah.
I do want to leave time at the end to take questions from the audience, but before we do that, perhaps we can finish on a sort of quick fire round of questions. So going down the line for each of you, what would you say would be the top priorities, either from a business perspective or perspective of policies? What would you say are the top priorities for decarbonization, sustainable mobility for the next 5 to 10 years? Rob?
A top priority for aviation is global coordination. Starting to happen, but we need more to go.
Aravind?
Top priority for two-wheelers, electric two-wheelers, electrification, I believe is standardization of charging standards, which is not existing in two-wheelers today. It exists for cars. So there are some, even if you take the top 10 electric two-wheeler OEMs in the country, each of them have their own charging standards. So standardization of charging.
Standardization in India or across the world?
Globally, I think India is in a good position to standardize the charging standards for two-wheelers because we are the largest two-wheeler market in the world.
Santosh?
I would say long-term consistency in the policy making and the direction, because we see it happens, there is clear direction, but there is no commitment on the continuity on policy making, be it taxation regime or be it in terms of, the decarbonized agenda. And of course, I think it's also influenced a lot by geopolitics. So hopefully there is a larger feeling that this is the way to go geopolitically, and also India is committed on this roadmap that we have already started with.
Karthik.
I think making the externality of congestion being felt on private mobility is probably the most important priority for me. It remains the holy grail because it's impossible to almost enforce this demand side measure in a country like India, because it always feels like you're excluding the poor. But to me, that's like the top ask in any government meeting that I go to.
And again, a sort of quick fire round, but what are the technologies existing or emerging that you find most exciting when it comes to sustainable and different mobility? You mentioned the Internet of Things and how sensors can help with that. Why don't you start talking about that?
No, I think, as Mercedes-Benz, we invented the car, we continue to invent and we'll reinvent it again. That's what we firmly believe in. So, and there is a lot yet to come. I think even when it comes to decarbonization or even using sensors, technology, apps in the car, I think autonomous is one big leap that would happen in a couple of years. Now, the question for India is, do India need autonomous driving? We have drivers in India, and whether autonomous works in India. But I think, again, when I talk about safety, a lot of accidents happen because people use mobile phones while driving or while even on bikes. Imagine autonomous car can give you that 20 minutes in the traffic condition to also finish your work or catch up with family. So that's the smaller use cases that will come in, which will also redefine how mobility is being structured. And it's just not about driverless cars. It's all about making cars safer using technology on autonomous side. So I think we have yet to see the inflection point. And of course, cell chemistry is changing. I think it's a matter of time. Whatever we are today thinking of range, charging time, also recycling of some of these resources, all of this will be challenged heavily and will reinvent itself in days, months and years to come.
Sticking with the EV sector, what technologies are you most excited about?
Particularly for the EV sector, I think it is the amount of volume which is required to package a particular quantity of energy. Like today's cell chemistry allows a two-wheeler battery pack to go maybe 150 kilometers consistently. On the same volume, there are chemistries, there are researches happening. How do you package enough energy to go 300 kilometers? So packaging of energy, whether it's battery cells, whether it's hydrogen cells, that is pretty much what is going to, we got to watch forward for that.
Bob, give us insights from the aviation sector.
There's probably there's a huge amount of tech that goes into an aircraft. If you could peel back the layers and look inside it, you'd be astonished at just how much tech is in there. But two things. One, the short-haul electric is, as I said earlier, here today. Anywhere that's congested, that is going to make a difference. If you can get from A to B, which might have taken you 2 hours on the road, it might take you 8 minutes to do your 100 kilometres. So that's going to be a very niche market, I admit that, but that's exciting. Just the other thing, and it's local, I saw it just yesterday at our Bangalore site, which is a prototype for the next aircraft that's we're developing with NASA, called the Transonic Truss Brace Wing. X66 is what the title is. So that's going to look a little bit different. The wings are going to sit up on the top of the fuselage with a strut that goes up to hold them there securely. They're wider. What it does is it provides a lot more real estate under the wing for much bigger engines. So that can deliver, based on the estimates working with NASA, 30% efficiency improvement on the best-in-class aircraft today. So I think the exciting bit, well, it's exciting generally, but it's also exciting that it's being worked on. They've got the wings fully assembled in the building just down the road, fully opened up. There's a lot of tech just in wings, but that's exciting.
Karthik, what about you?
It's a lot less sexy than what I think all of our colleagues here have talked about, but to me, just data to understand what people's mobility choices are like, given the ubiquitousness of mobile devices and the positioning systems that we currently have, the the fact that we don't understand in more near real time how people are moving, and the fact that this data is priced out of policymakers and analysts who can effectively influence the way city planning can happen is a big tragedy. So I'm hoping that technology can make that available, right? Whether it's the Googles of the world, whether it's others, how can you make that available in a way that many people can actually consume that and help, urban planners plan better for mobility, I think is the...
What sort of technology are you talking about there to help with planning?
I mean, just to be honest, just data sharing which is anonymized. I mean, and that's technology too, right? So how do you basically have a data stack for urban mobility that tells you, for instance, in cities like Bangalore, these are the clusters where, which are basically your gravity clusters for, taking in, people in the mornings, in the afternoons, where are people moving from? What is the deficit between what public transport is currently providing versus private mobility? None of that information is, and to me, if I have to get that data, for instance, for a city, for a month, I have to shell out something like, $2,500. A city a month. And this is not even representative. These are like, bits and bobs. So we need that cost to come down significantly to be able to help understand how can I deploy any of these solutions in a more cost-effective way to actually cater to the mobility that people are undertaking today.
This has been fascinating. I have so many more questions for all of you, but I do want to give an opportunity to the audience to ask questions. So please do raise your hand. Yeah, the gentleman over there. Please introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Hi, this is Deepak. I'm looking to work in the mobility sector. And this question is for Karthik. I want to know what trends you see to be, what do you find most hopeful with regards to sustainable mobility? What are some trends that you find most hopeful?
Hopeful?
Yes. We spoke about priorities, but there are some good things that are happening.
I think two-wheeler electrification is probably the hope that I see on the horizon. That it is effectively taking away at least, the emissions that come from 75% of the petrol that's basically consumed in the economy. To me, that's the hope. And the hope that it brings down the cost of, indigenization, or of innovation, so to say, within India, and that it'll eventually sort of flow up the value chain, or rather, to three-wheelers, four-wheelers, and effectively electrify. That's the hope. That's not necessarily the most desirable one, but that's the hope that I see, that electrification is likely for the reasons that I think our colleague pointed out with regard to the costs of electric mobility today. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, more questions for our panelists. Yes, the gentleman over here. If we can get a microphone to you.
Hi. See, I'm Abhishek. I'm into education industry, a service provider, wherein I connect industries to the education institutes. My main question is, talking about the guidelines, talking about the safety and upgradation of the mobility in the modern world. So how can we bring our children who are studying now in terms of data security? Every day, while we hear a phone call or while we do the phone call, there is a lot of cyber frauds that we are getting. How do we trust, and what guidelines have the government bought for the industry heads so that they can monitor for this data privacy and data security?
Who would like to take that?
Not something that we
Not
are
linked directly to this current session, but data privacy in general, I think firstly, we have to be sensitive to the topic of privacy itself. As a culture, it's not as much, many things we don't, the debate on data is very limited in India. But I think here again, if you look at policy making, the data draft bill is already out for public opinion. I think in the next 30 days, it will be closed. Hopefully in the next session, the law should be there. And as all of us, many of us across businesses, we need to follow. In terms of education, I think it's up to, today when we give consent, that kind of sensitiveness as a society we don't have. If I again look into my friends in Europe, they think 10 times. They look into the consent, they go in, they check. But here, even, and that doesn't only rely to data. Even when many of us in this room would have applied a loan, who is reading that form? We just sign papers. I think it's a very trust-based society. So the consent is given more trust-based and thinking that it will be rightfully used. But yes, times are changing. I think today's generation is more digital. They will also understand that their data can be misled. But I think it's an aging population in India. I think the 50 plus who don't realize they are caught unaware, they are using devices, they don't know that their data is getting compromised. I think it's up to us, you can say the Gen Z or the Gen X, whatever we can call them, to educate the Gen Grey also that be aware of these topics. But nothing more from my side on this.
We
Hello,
have
sir.
time for maybe one more question.
One question.
Yes, maybe. Okay.
Dr. Azmatullah, I'm again into the B School director. So I have a question that rapidly urbanizing world, and you are giving two-wheelers and four-wheelers, talking about the safety and all. How do you think that the generation, the X and then Y? So how do you feel that being a manufacturer of two-wheeler, creating an awareness of this safety measures? You just give the safety measures, as you said, like Mercedes, the safest vehicle, if you say simply, but there are so many other manufacturers out there. How do you feel and responsible for the generation? Why that from your side, corporate side, how to do something so that safety measures can be taken by generation Y? Because youngsters, as you know, that very hot blood and they will go very fast and rash driving. Why don't this corporate manufacturing two-wheeler, four-wheelers use some sort of a awareness program, feel responsible ethically, so that this can be maintained on par with the rapidly urbanizing world?
So we run one of the largest safety initiatives in India. It's called Safe Roads. It is done across 100 schools annually. We touch base with around 10,000 kids. We also have simulators. We have created goggles where once you put the goggle, then you know what does feel like drunken driving. Or even for seat belts, we have sliders which we have created. We give it in schools where you sit in the slider without the seat belt, and then you realize even at a speed of 20 km per hour what can happen. So we try to do our own bit, but that's very small because again it's a large country. 1.4 billion people. There are many OEMs, and I would really say it's not only us, but CM also does a lot of work. Other OEMs also do. But it's for all in this room to spread. I would be curious to see how many of you go back now and wear a rear seat belt when you sit in your car, because I hardly see any after coming from the airport and back. So I think let's start from this room and then take this message also across. But anything you want to add?
I think we do it more at a grassroots level, okay? Like for example, as simple as educating someone that you need to wear a helmet while riding a two-wheeler, which is extremely difficult. We kind of give free helmets in certain states where we believe the awareness needs to be created more. Another example, we do not let a customer who comes with a kid take a test ride of the scooter with the kid. It is like we tell them, please don't do this. So, but I strongly believe the education has to happen from the family and the society, because if a small kid today sees the father driving a two-wheeler on a footpath, they basically grow up thinking that this is normal. How many fathers take their kids on the two-wheeler and go in the wrong side? So, we as responsible OEMs will do our bit by making the vehicles safe. We have very limited control over people's behavior. We will again do our limited bit trying to do that, but the education has to start from families and societies.
I see so many more hands in the audience. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you all so much for joining us here today. A round of applause for our panelists, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Check. Ladies and gentlemen, I would request you to please remain in the hall for the next couple of minutes. First and foremost, could we have a huge round of applause for our moderator and our panelists? That was an amazing session. And we would like to present a memento as a thank you from our end for giving us your time and most importantly for giving us so many aspects of mobility. Ladies and gentlemen, a big, big round of applause, please. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, let's have a huge round of applause for our moderator and our panelists.